on the Texas-Mexican border, it gets western. Those days need to end. We need to put the National Guard on the border and secure the border. It will protect the United States and Mexico, and that's just the way it is. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Sutton. You're recognized.
I request permission to address the House for 5 minutes and to reply to the amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, people from across Ohio are gathering at the State House in Columbus. And they're gathering to speak up for workers and the middle class in this country. Last Tuesday, I went to Columbus and joined our brothers and sisters in our fight to protect the right of public employees to have a voice at the negotiating table. And as we gathered to oppose Senate Bill 5, that backward effort of Governor Kasich and his Republican friends in the state legislature to eliminate collective bargaining, I was struck by the weight of the moment and by the weight of this fight. But I was inspired, too, inspired to see thousands of people from across the state coming together to protest the radical measures that the Republicans were proposing. And though we can't be there today physically, we are there with those who gather at the State House, and we stand with them from our place here in our nation's capital. Last week we were there, shoulder to shoulder, people in common purpose, standing up for working families, standing together in the fight for the promise of the middle class. The unfair, backward-thinking attack on Ohio's firefighters, police, teachers, nurses, and other dedicated public employees must be stopped. And I'm proud to be standing with Ohioans that are fair-minded as we fight for progress, not for a return to old ways. Instead of pursuing this draconian measure attacking Ohio's working families, lawmakers at every level of government should be focused on the critical priority of getting people back to work. Instead of engaging in attacks on those who have chosen to teach our children and protect our communities and keep us safe, everyone should be working to strengthen our economy and create jobs. That, in turn, would generate the revenue we need to fairly compensate our public employees with the wages and the benefits which they have been promised and they have earned. The focus of all officials, as I said, across all levels of government should be on creating jobs, not taking more from our workers. It was not our workers who drove the economy off the cliff. It was not our workers in Ohio. It was not the workers in Wisconsin. But it seems that the Republicans just can't stop themselves. Similar efforts to disempower working families in the middle class are occurring right here in Washington. It's not just collective bargaining for public employees that they're after. 2 weeks ago, Republicans tried to pass a measure in Congress to prohibit the paying of prevailing wages and to stop local project labor agreements, which would put a hard hit on our tradespeople. They even tried to eliminate the National Labor Relations Board, the very board that exists as a referee to make sure that our workers get a fair shake. Yet they have not offered any job creation bills. And at the same time they're not creating jobs, they're defunding programs that have real benefits. Their refusal to expand the trade adjustment assistance that helped workers who were displaced because of the trade policies that they pursued. The refusal of some to extend unemployment benefits to those who are out of a job through no fault of their own. At the same time they are working to not create jobs, they are also giving no assistance to those who are left without a job. It's issues like these that make it so important that we keep our heads up in Ohio. And to all of those who are out there in Ohio and across the country fighting this fight, it's an important fight, and what you do matters. It's important that we speak up and be heard, that the issues that matter to us so very deeply are well-sounded. We have to stand together and work together and fight forward. You know, using the deficit as an excuse, there are those who are trying to convince the American people that a more fair economy would result in a much less efficient economy. But fairness and efficiency are not mutually exclusive. Using the deficit as an excuse to give an disproportionate hit to workers or unions is not the way to go. I would hope that the Republicans, both at the state level as well as here in Congress, would join with us to focus on what we really need to do, and that is to create jobs. And I would hope that they would stop the misguided attack on workers and the middle class. And I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lankford. The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes. It's granted.
I rise to challenge this body, and I hope that my message is well received. This nation was founded on the rules of the Constitution, not the opinions of Republicans and Democrats. Our decisions are judged in light of the traditions of the past and the precedent that it sets for the future and the future generations. Mr. Speaker, according to our Constitution, a president cannot pick and choose which parts of the law they prefer. The executive branch does not write the law, nor choose the law, it enforces the law. The basic function of every president is to enforce the law. Every executive branch agency has its foundation in a short and clear statement from the Constitution stating this: he, that means the president, he shall take care that the law be faithfully executed. A president can petition for laws to be changed, he can complain about a law, he can encourage passage of new law, but he cannot just ignore the law or write new law. Only the courts can throw out a law, and only Congress can write a law. The President and the Department of Justice cannot unilaterally decide not to enforce the Defense of Marriage Act. For decades, the Congress has been donating their constitutional powers to the executive branch by giving increased rulemaking authority to the different agencies. Our agencies now write rules that look more like legislation than regulation. We've allowed people to serve in cabinet-light level positions without Senate approval. We've exponentially increased the budget for White House staff, and now the President wants to set a new precedent that he alone can determine which laws that he likes and he does not like. With this action, the President has invented a retroactive veto on all previous presidents and all previous congressional acts. It is ultimately ironic that the executive branch states that several lower courts have rejected the Defense of Marriage Act as unconstitutional, so they are accepting the lower court rulings over higher courts. In the past year, the health care law was ruled unconstitutional, but the federal government is pressing forward. The administration was instructed by the courts to lift the drilling moratorium in the Gulf, but they stalled. It's apparent that this administration is bent on placing its political preferences ahead of the courts, ahead of the legislative branch, and the majority of the American people. Both parties need to understand the precedent that's being set by the President choosing to not enforce the Defense of Marriage Act. My Democrat friends should imagine for a moment, what if a Republican president takes the oath and he instructs HHS and all other agencies not to enforce Obamacare, though it's the law of the land, because some lower court rejected it? They would be outraged, rightfully so, because currently it is the law of the land. A president cannot just unilaterally throw it aside. Before this conversation is spun as a partisan issue, let me remind everyone, though, that the Defense of Marriage Act passed the House and the Senate by a wide bipartisan majority and was signed into law by a Democrat president. This is not only a slap in the face to our constitutional system, it is a slap to Republicans and Democrats who express the will of their districts and states on an issue that has been settled in law. The people spoke through Congress, and one person, even a president, cannot undermine the will of the people, at least not in the America that I grew up in. I do not think we'll fully understand the implications of this action if we allow it to stand. We must not act partisan now and regret it later. This is not the way to deal with the gay marriage debate, is for the President to just sweep it aside and say, I will not enforce the law. Many in this chamber are well aware of my traditional view of marriage and my biblical worldview. I am unashamed of my personal faith in Jesus Christ. I believe that words have meaning, though, and that the meaning of marriage is the union of a man and a woman. The Defense of Marriage Act codified that definition in law, representing the belief of a majority of Americans. This issue is well beyond faith, though, or a social issue, or even a political issue. Marriage is now not only the center of a national social debate, it's now the center of a constitutional debate. Weeks ago, some members of the press suggested that Republicans would ignore the budget and focus on social issues. I find it ironic now that the President has submitted a budget that will raise the national debt to $26 trillion by his own numbers, and he has decided to change the national debate from fiscal issues to social issues and gay marriage. As a Congress, we cannot demand of the executive branch. That is a co-equal branch of government. But I believe we must require the executive branch to fulfill its oath of office and constitutional requirement to faithfully execute the laws of the United States. And I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Ohio. The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to express my strong opposition to attempts by the Republican governor of Ohio to undermine collective bargaining for Ohio's public employees. Ohio Senate Bill 5 is a measure currently under consideration by the Ohio General Assembly that would strip state workers of collective bargaining rights. I firmly support the right of public employees to collectively negotiate. Who are we as a nation when we tell our firefighters and our police officers and other public protectors that they should have no say in their working conditions? Does a teacher's experience or education have no economic value? Ohio's proposed legislation is less about fiscal responsibility than an overt political attack on public workers who speak with a collective voice. As labor battles erupt in state capitals around the nation, a majority of Americans say they oppose efforts to weaken the collective bargaining rights of public employee unions. According to the latest New York Times CBS News poll, Americans are against cutting the pay or benefits of public workers to reduce the state budget deficits. We shouldn't forget, Mr. Speaker, the benefits that collective bargaining offers. For almost 28 years, collective bargaining has reduced labor strife. It has reduced the likelihood of strikes, improved training and productivity among public employees, created a sense of job security, and it is fair. It is fair to all working people. The repeal of collective bargaining will do nothing to balance the budget. 9% of the state's budget is for state employees. So, just as an example, if we fired every state employee in Ohio, it would save us only $2 billion. Leaving the state without vital services, and there would still be a $6 billion deficit. Since this does not address the budget deficit, it is clear that anti-worker forces are using this to harm middle-income workers and to kill jobs. I would like to share an observation with you that was from a former president of the United States, and I quote, "Republicans stand foursquare for the American home, but not for housing. They are strong for labor, but they are stronger for restricting labor's rights. They favor minimum wage. The smaller the minimum wage, the better. They endorse educational opportunity for all, but they won't spend money for teachers or for schools. They think modern medical care and hospitals are fine for people who can afford them. That is the philosophy of the masters of the Republican Party." These are words of President Harry Truman, and they were spoken in 1948. These words ring as true today as they did in 1948. We have made too many advances over the past generations, and Americans should not be forced to choose between a job and their rights. We cannot and should not return to the days when public workers had limited rights to bargain. The middle class was created and has been sustained by collective bargaining and other labor protections. The public sector is about working families. Rolling back these rights will hurt the middle-income wage earners of this country and will hurt America. Ohio needs jobs, not a partisan victory. I urge members of the Ohio General Assembly to deliberate with care and avoid rushing to adopt a measure that weakens our middle income, weakens our state, and costs us jobs. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to the members of the House, I rise today as the ranking member on Transportation, Railroads, and Subcommittee. I've been on this committee for over 19 years. I serve on Transportation because it's one of the most bipartisan committees in the House. I got to tell you, I'm very, very disappointed with Florida Governor Rick Scott. Last week, the governor told the Secretary of Transportation, Ray LaHood, that the state of Florida can do without the $2.5 billion for federal highway rail funding. $2.5 billion. 90% of the project is funded with federal tax dollars. That's money that Floridians sent to Washington that we're sending back to Florida, gasoline tax money, not money from any foreign source, by the way. In addition, it didn't just happen. We worked on it bipartisan for years. In fact, in 1980, Bob Graham appointed me to a committee to work on high-speed rail in Florida. Over 30 years, we've worked on it. And let me just tell you, 90% of the funding would put over 60,000 Floridians to work. And it's 90% of the funding. Well, it's another 10% there. Absolutely. The private sector has indicated that they would put the 10% there. I have model trains in front of me here today. We have over 8 companies committed to high-speed rail. In fact, we started the rail system in Florida, in this country, in Florida Flagler, but in this country. We started the rail system, and now we are the caboose, and they don't use cabooses anymore. But all of our partners, the Chinese, the French, 8 different countries want to be our partners. They have indicated that they would put up the 10% because they want to have the first right of refusal to go from Orlando to Miami, and everybody knows that's the moneymaker. Well, why is the first portion that the state of Florida applied for and the legislature in Florida came to the Congress and asked us to be partners, why was that first leg the first leg? Because all of the environmental issues have been resolved. In other words, we could put rail in Florida tomorrow if this contract went out. Florida have a 12% unemployment, 12%, and in my area, 15%. The governor says that he's not a politician, and I agree with him, but he says he's a businessman. What businessman would walk away from a 90% funding? Well, 90% funded, and you're a businessman? Well, I'm concerned about Florida being left with the 10%. Well, if you're a businessman, then you know attorneys, they can write it any way you want to make sure we can protect the people of Florida. So that is not the issue. Money is not the issue. Liability is not the issue. This is the worst kind of politics I've seen since I've been elected. It is a sad state of affairs. The governor say, let's get to work. I agree with you, Mr. Governor, but you got to be working on something. You got to have some projects. Infrastructure is what put America to work. Well, what projects do you have, Mr. Governor, in your budget? You say, well, I want this money. I think it would be better used for ports. What's in your budget? Ports. Florida got 14 ports. We compete with other states. So what is in your budget that's going to put Floridians to work? And you come and say, well, I want another lane on I-4. Well, any of us that live in Orlando, or anybody visit I-4, know that another lane won't help us. We have 8 lanes. I just returned Monday from Salt Lake City, Utah, where we lost the money. It went, a few years ago, money for Orlando went to Salt Lake City, Utah, and they run trains every day, move 40,000 people a day, rail, Salt Lake City, Utah. And so the money that we have appropriated this Friday will go to some other state. It will go to New York or California or Salt Lake City, Utah, or some other place. We're going to have rail in this country. What happens when failure is not an option? We must make sure that we work together to put Floridians to work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Members are reminded to address the chair with their remarks. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Ryan, is recognized. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few years back, towards the end of my grandfather's life, he was a steel worker for about 40 years. And towards the end of his life, he couldn't drive anymore. And I had the pleasure one day of taking him shopping. And in Ohio, and in where I come from in Niles, shopping is an art form. So we had to go to a certain place for the meat, and a certain place for the cheese, and a certain place for something was on sale somewhere else. So I got to spend the day with my grandpa. And we had to go and get something, and he said that we should go to a certain store. And I said, well, Grandpa, you know, Giant Eagle's right here. We could just go right here. He says, we can't go there. I said, why not? It's right here. He said, the meat cutters are on strike, and we can't cross the picket line. He didn't go to Giant Eagle out of respect for the worker, out of respect for the situation that those workers were in at that grocery store. And the issue that we are talking about in Ohio and Wisconsin is an issue of respect for the average worker in the United States of America. And for us to somehow try to obscure the issue and blame workers, firefighters who go into burning buildings when we're all running out of them, police officers who we call up when we're in trouble, or teachers that we ask in many instances to spend more time with our kids than we do, somehow push the blame of the major financial meltdown that happened because of Wall Street recklessness, blame the teachers for that, and ask them to go out and get rid of their right to stick together to determine what size of classroom, how many kids are in their classroom, is ridiculous. And at the same time, in Ohio, we have the top person who works for the current administration get a $40,000 pay increase from what the last governor was paying, and the secretaries and the people in the mailroom get a cut. And the firefighters and the police and the teachers get a cut. While all this is going on in Ohio, they want to cut the estate tax for the wealthiest people who live in the state of Ohio and ask the teacher to make the sacrifice. This is disrespectful and unfair to the workers in the state of Ohio. And if we want to have a 21st century America where we compete with the globe, where we compete as 300 million people, compete with 1.3 billion people in China, over 1 billion people in India, and we're going to tell our teachers that they can't be treated with respect. How are we going to get good teachers to come into the teaching profession when they're going to be the foil for all of problems we have in our country? When we ask them to take our kids, who has lice, who hasn't eaten today, who's hungry, who has a domestic violence issue in their family, these people, these children, all go before our teachers. And we're going to say that they don't have a right to bargain, a right to come together to say what size their class is? We're going to pull their pensions from them? This is not right. This is not right. And we need to get back to where we were when my grandfather was around. We realize the world's different, and we've got to compete globally. But the issue is, are we going to respect work in the United States of America? Are we going to respect the workers in the United States of America while all these fat cats have gotten off scot-free? And we turn around and tell the workers in Ohio and Wisconsin and Indiana and the Big Ten Conference, you got to take the hit. It's unfair and it's disrespectful and it is not an American value.
Members of the gallery are reminded not to show approval or disapproval of any speech that's made on the floor of the House. Pursuant to Clause 12(a) of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until the hour of 12 noon.
The House returns in about a half an hour at noon Eastern to begin work on temporary federal spending. Current funding ends on Friday.